I did ask whether it was the opinion of yourself and the government that the Northern Ireland Protocol was fit for purpose. Could you please be kind enough to make a comment about that when you reply to these questions?
Well, thank you very much, Sybil, and thank you to your committee. It's a pleasure to appear in front of you. The first thing to say is that the principal means of coordinating efforts across government is through the XO committee. As your committee will be aware, the XO committee brings together different government departments, currently under my chairmanship, in order to make sure that we are implementing the TCA in all its particulars, and also that we're working with business and with civil society in order to make sure that people are aware of the changes that are required now that the transition period has ended and the TCA is in place, and are also aware of the opportunities that exist now that we're outside the European Union. It is the case, as you quite rightly point out, that Lord Frost, who of course so successfully led the negotiations, is leading a new unit in number 10, and the Cabinet Office team will be working alongside him, and we're considering how to modernise the Cabinet Office Secretariat in order to ensure that the roles that have been taken by Task Force Europe and the Transition Task Force in the past are properly integrated into that. Ultimate ministerial responsibility, of course, rests with the Prime Minister on a matter as important as this. I'm currently the joint chair of the Joint Committee alongside Vice President Maroš Šefčovič. As you will know, he's also been appointed as the co-chair of the Partnership Council, and the Prime Minister is considering which minister should be the UK co-chair of the Partnership Council alongside Maroš Šefčovič, and I know that we will inform the House and this committee as soon as the Prime Minister has made that decision. On the Northern Ireland Protocol, I think that there are a number of areas in the Northern Ireland Protocol where recent events have shown that we do need to look at its application on the ground. The protocol, of course, was designed to ensure that Northern Ireland, as an integral part of the UK customs territory, could benefit fully from the UK internal market, but in a way that recognised our desire to help the EU protect its own single market. There are a number of issues, and I'm sure the committee will want to go into detail, where we believe that we do need refinement of the way in which the protocol operates for it to be effective in the interests of the people of Northern Ireland. The overarching aim of the protocol is to make sure that the gains that the people of Northern Ireland have enjoyed in the last 20 or so years are consolidated and built on. And at the moment, as this committee will be aware, there are concerns across communities in Northern Ireland about the impact of the protocol.
That's a very interesting answer, particularly regarding the future of the Joint Committee, but we shall wait and see on that. I'd now like to ask Andrea Jenkins if she would be good enough to ask the second question.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Minister. Why didn't you share the details of the content of the Joint Committee's decisions and unilateral declarations relating to the protocol on Northern Ireland and Ireland with Parliament ahead of their adoption to allow a degree of scrutiny, please?
Well, I think there are specific issues about the way in which the Joint Committee is set up. But of course, those who sit on the Joint Committee, which include, of course, all the member states of the European Union, also include the representatives of Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland Executive are represented on it. But it is explicitly the Joint Committee, a creation of the withdrawal agreement. But I'll bring in Brendan Threlfall, who is the lead official in this area, who may be able to say a little bit more.
Thank you, CDL. Yes, I think it's just worth clarifying that we did share the draft decisions and unilateral declarations with Parliament, and actually published them immediately after agreement between the Joint Committee co-chairs in early December, ahead of their formal adoption on the 17th of December. So those decisions and declarations were available to Parliament ahead of the Joint Committee, which formally agreed them.
The next question, Anne-Marie Morris, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Chancellor, how does the statutory prohibition on agreement by written procedure improve accountability if Parliament cannot assess draft decisions of the committee before they're agreed and take effect? And I think, Chancellor, you made quite a bit of this when you put forward this position that no written procedure could be used as a positive, which would deliver transparency. But I'm at a loss to understand how we're going to have that transparency.
Well, our view, the government's collective view, was that we should avoid agreement by written procedure, precisely so that we could ensure that those things which had to be agreed by the Joint Committee were agreed by ministers, by the respective co-chairs and others in the forum of the Joint Committee through appropriate discussion. It was an attempt to ensure that we made the process as inclusive and as open as possible, consistent with the institutional architecture of the Joint Committee. But again, I'll refer to Brendan Threlfall for further detail.
Thanks, CDL. Yes, I think it's just worth reiterating that in the terms of the agreement last December, we obviously did, the decisions were formally adopted by at the Joint Committee by a minister on the 17th of December. And before that, as soon as very shortly after the co-chairs reached a sort of in principle agreement on a package on the 8th of December, we published those decisions in draft and all the unilateral declarations actually, and a UK government document, and transmitted all those to this committee and other relevant committees in the Commons. So there was a period of time for scrutiny, but prior to the Joint Committee formally agreeing.
And I think more broadly, specifically with respect to the Northern Ireland Protocol, as you know, the government published a command paper outlining the approach that it would take towards the Northern Ireland Protocol. That invited some criticism from some parties, not the fact of its publication, but the direction of travel that we wanted to take. And that command paper made clear the government's determination to ensure that the place of Northern Ireland in the United Kingdom was secured and the interests of people of Northern Ireland were upheld by the UK government. That's not to say that there aren't plenty of areas where either the decisions of the Joint Committee or its operation might not be criticised, but I hope that the publication of the command paper helped to inform not just Parliament, but also the EU about the approach that we were going to take to that question.
Oh, and did you want to ask question 4?
By all means. Because it is a natural sequitur, if I might. So, Chancellor, so far, as in a way you've already alluded to, you've only published information on joint UK-EU decisions after their agreement. And despite the evidence that Brendan Threlfall from your team gave, I don't quite see how that improves transparency. I can't see a clear timeline or a mechanism to enable Parliament to properly scrutinise matters.
Well, again, I think that we're operating through the Joint Committee in a way that any government would negotiate with another international organisation or state. It's always the case that when you have negotiations of this kind, that they happen government to government, executive to executive, or in this case, government to commission or commission representative. But of course, we outline the approach that we're taking through command papers, through statements to Parliament, and through opportunities such as this. It is the case that during the course of last year, I and other ministers appeared in front of the now defunct FREU Select Committee, and indeed my colleague Paymaster General, I think, appeared before this committee to explain the approach that we were taking, the judgments that we made, the policy behind it, and the trade-offs that we were prepared to contemplate. And I'm looking forward to appearing in front of this committee as regularly as you'd like me to, as the work of the Joint Committee and indeed the Partnership Council proceeds. And if it is the case that other ministers take on these responsibilities, I know that they will be equally, if not more, assiduous in making sure that they make themselves available.
Chancellor, I'm delighted to hear that you are prepared to make yourself available as much as we should choose. And I hope that you will, in the same spirit, how shall I put it, encourage other ministers to join that enthusiasm for joining us to discuss matters. But perhaps, Chancellor, I could pin you down?
Mm.
Because it seems to me, despite your warm words, we're not getting much specificity as to what we're going to get when. So will you commit to prior publication of draft agendas and draft decisions of the various UK EU bodies with sufficient time, and I'd like you to tell me what you think that is, for Parliament and other stakeholders to assess them, ask questions and raise concerns before the relevant meetings?
I think there's no problem in publishing an agenda beforehand. And I think one of the things that may be helpful, and this is an offer I make and other ministers may want to augment this, is to allow me to appear before this committee, or another minister to appear before this committee, before appropriate meetings of the Joint Committee or the Partnership Council. I should add that it is also the case that it's envisaged that there should be a joint parliamentary, I hesitate to say assembly, but certainly committees with EU parliamentarians and UK parliamentarians meeting. And again, it's, as I've stressed in other committees, for the House of Commons to decide itself what it thinks the best means of affecting scrutiny and ensuring cooperation might be.
So, Chancellor, when you say it is the House of Commons, are you anticipating the Leader of the House comes forward with a proposal? How are you expecting the specificity of this transparency to be determined? And what is your thought on timing? Because we need to move forwards.
I quite agree. It has been our habit so far to publish a written ministerial statement before every joint committee meeting with the agenda. It is also the case that, of course, Parliament can, through urgent questions or demands for statements, have me or any other minister appear on the floor of the House. But with respect to how the House itself organises its committees, that's ultimately a matter for members of the Commons. One of the things I said when I was being asked by the Lords Committee on the EU last year about how Parliament should operate and whether or not there should be some body that brought together EU and UK parliamentarians is that it very much was the case that I wanted to facilitate that, but I didn't want to insist on its model. So it was the House that decided that the through select committee should dissolve itself, as it were. That means inevitably that this committee takes on even more responsibilities. But ultimately, I don't think it's the government that should decide the shape or the agenda of select committees. That is a House matter. But of course, we will do everything we can to facilitate the effective scrutiny that the House needs to enjoy of government activity.
That's helpful, and I'm sure that the chairman, Sir William, will take that forward. But can I just press you, when you say you are going to commit to the prior publication, within what time frame?
Well, more or less as soon as we agree an agenda with our co-chair of the Joint Committee, we then publish it in a WMS. Now, of course, the timing of joint committees can sometimes be accelerated as they were in the run-up to the agreements that we reached last December. But again, we do everything we can to make sure that that WMS is printed in, and shared with the House in good time. And
Chancellor, could I take it as a given that that will never be less than 7 days?
I don't think I can give that commitment, but I think it's a very good target to work towards.
Thank you. If I may, much groundwork for Joint Committee and Partnership Council decisions is done by specialised committees in specific areas like the Northern Ireland Protocol, fisheries and energy. In some instances, these committees can adopt binding decisions. How will you make the work of the specialised committees under both the TCA and the WA as transparent as possible? Will you mirror for them the sort of procedures that you've just outlined with regard to the other committee?
Yeah, just 1 minute for the benefit of the audience or the public. TCA means Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and the WA means a withdrawal agreement.
Thank you, Sir William. And yes, I think that the role of the specialised committees will be a very important part of the ongoing set of relationships that the UK has with the EU and its member states. And as we settle into a rhythm of meeting, so we will settle into a rhythm of sharing in advance agendas and making sure that there is room for appropriate parliamentary scrutiny.
So those will be shared in the same way as you've described those of the joint committee?
I'd want to mirror them as closely as possible, but of course, whoever is the UK chair of the Partnership Council, whether it's me or another minister, I think will want to talk to Vice President Šefčovič in order to ensure that we have a system that respects the need of the House to scrutinise the work of those specialised committees with the nature and the timing of their meeting. So, by its very nature, it is a joint body, but I think I can guarantee and underline that we will do everything possible to make sure that there is a timely notification of the House and of this committee of the agenda and an opportunity for any questioning and debate beforehand about what it is that we need to achieve in those committees.
I'm delighted to have the guarantee, Chancellor, and I'm assuming it's taken as read that your commitment to endeavour to enable Parliament to have at least 7 days applies for these committees as much as it does to the Joint Committee.
Yes, wherever possible. It will sometimes be the case, as recent events have shown, that actions may be taken by the EU that mean that we have to have meetings, whether the specialised committees, the Joint Committee or Partnership Council, in very short order in order to deal with a fast-moving issue. And so, it won't always be the case, but regular meetings of the specialised committees or the Joint Committee, when things are proceeding as smoothly as they should, then of course we will endeavour to share the agenda well in advance.
Thank you, Chancellor. Sir William, over to you.
Thank you very much. David Jones, would you like to ask the next question, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask a few questions about the events of the last week of January, which was when, of course, the European Union passed an implementing regulation which effectively prevented the export of vaccine from the EU to the United Kingdom, and also triggered the mechanism under Article 16 of the Northern Ireland Protocol, effectively doubling down on that and preventing the export of vaccine to Northern Ireland. You immediately raised your concerns with the European Union, or at least fairly shortly afterwards. But what impact would you say that triggering of the Article 16 mechanism has had upon relations between the United Kingdom and the European Union, and indeed upon the stability of the protocol?
Well, I think you're right, David, to light on this as an extremely important moment. And as I explained to the House of Commons last week, it was a moment when trust was eroded, when damage was done, and where movement is required in order to ensure that we have an appropriate reset. The first thing to say, as I think this committee knows, but I think it's just worth placing on the record, is that ordinarily Article 16 should only be invoked after notice has been given and after a means of resolution of the issue at hand has been found through the Joint Committee. And it's meant to take 30 days in order to try to find a resolution. It was the case, as you know, that the written procedure, the Commission document was published without adequate notice, without any real notice actually being given either to the UK government or, to that matter, to the Irish government, even though manifestly Ireland is a member state. So not only was it the case that the EU's own procedures were set aside, but the EU's own members were ridden roughshod over, and more than that, Article 16 exists in order to protect the people of Northern Ireland. It is not there in order to make sure that the EU's own vaccine procurement programme can be salvaged in whatever way by taking this sort of action. That is completely inappropriate. I spelt that out to colleagues in the European Commission. To be fair to the European Commission, that evening they changed their approach, but it is still of concern that as things stand, the EU reserve the right potentially to return to Article 16 in this area. As things stand, that regulation is still in place in its current form. And I think there needs to be a realization on all sides that this isn't just some arcane bit of, diplomatic procedure. This has real consequences on the ground. People in Northern Ireland have made their views clear about the way in which the protocol is affecting their daily lives. My aim is to ensure that the people of Northern Ireland have their daily lives and livelihoods protected. And that is why I believe that we need that reset, which I alluded to.
Yes, would it be fair to say, therefore, that the triggering of the Article 16 procedure has had a significantly damaging effect upon EU-UK relations?
Well, I think it's had a damaging effect in Northern Ireland. I think with respect to UK-EU relations, one of the things that I try to do is to make sure that we can maintain civil, cordial and constructive relationships with the EU, with the Commission and with those who are our interlocutors. My principal concern is that that people in Northern Ireland saw that something which is designed for their benefit was being used, or potentially being used, I should say, against their interests. And that is the profound problem. The UK government wants to ensure that the protocol works in the interests of the people of Northern Ireland. There are specific issues that relate to the free movement of goods within the United Kingdom that the protocol bears on. And my principal concern is resolving these issues on the ground in the interests of the people of Northern Ireland, and that's what I hope we can all focus on.
Yes, in your letter to Mr. Šefčovič, you said across all political parties, civic society and business organisations in Northern Ireland, there was a sense of shock and anger. And you've actually expanded upon that point in your answer just now. What are you doing to try to allay the concerns of the people of Northern Ireland and businesses and civic society there? Because I would have thought that, as you pointed out in your letter to the Commissioner, they must be extremely concerned, not only as to the stability of the protocol, but also indeed as to its impact upon the Belfast Good Friday Agreement.
You are absolutely right. In the run-up to the end of the transition period and thereafter, I and other government departments have been constantly in touch with businesses in Northern Ireland and with political representatives in Northern Ireland in order to ensure the smoothest possible operation of the protocol and the lightest possible impact on their lives and livelihoods. Businesses, individuals and political representatives in Northern Ireland have brought to our attention issues large and small, which require to be resolved. These are all issues which I believe can be resolved pragmatically, and we have shared that analysis with the Commission. To take a case in point, it does not threaten, I believe, the integrity of the EU single market to have bulbs ordered from a wholesaler in Scotland or England, which will then be planted in a garden in Belfast or Ballymena. We need to be pragmatic and practical about this. And one of the points that I've made is that if people put a particular type of integrationist theology ahead of the interests of the people of Northern Ireland, they are not serving the cause of peace and progress in Northern Ireland. And that is my principal and overriding concern. There are very good people in the European Union's institutions and architecture who take incredibly seriously these issues, and I want to continue to work with them in order to make sure that we can resolve them, because it's my aim to make sure that people in Northern Ireland can go about their their daily lives with the minimum, the absolute minimum of dislocation or interference.
Well, there may well be people in the EU who take these matters very seriously, but quite clearly there are also a large number of people who are involved in the drawing up of this regulation that were not taking it so seriously. You've made the point that Annex 7 actually sets out a pretty high bar before the procedure is triggered. Why would you say the EU was so quick off the mark, so trigger happy to actually initiate this process without going through the very detailed requirements of Annex 7?
Well, again, I can only speculate, but I think I'd say two things. The first is that the speed with which some in the Commission acted took others in the Commission, and of course others, not least in Ireland, by surprise. And again, one of the things that I think, if I may say so, that the Commission probably owes its member states is a fuller explanation of why it acted in the way that it did. As we know, one of the, for some, including myself, challenges about the way in which the EU operates overall is that agreement in the Council of Ministers and the operation of the Commission is not perhaps as transparent as our own institutions are. That is their sovereign choice. We have to respect that. But as I say, any of us can speculate as to why the Commission acted as it did. Whatever its reasons, the consequences were undoubtedly, damaging for the smooth operation of the protocol, and they had, as I mentioned earlier, an adverse impact on trust in Northern Ireland.
Well, in fact, is it not going to be a case in future of once bitten, twice shy? Isn't the UK going to be extremely careful about accepting assurances from the European Union, given that they have, within a month of the end of the transition period, triggered what was regarded as the nuclear option?
Yes, I do absolutely take your point, but I think that the EU has acknowledged, the Commission has acknowledged that it made a mistake, and of course, it was relatively rapid in doing so, and EU figures, not least Vice President Šefčovič, were very gracious in acknowledging the nature of that mistake. I think it's important now that the appropriate lessons are learned. I'm sure they will be. I'm sure it will be the case that the Commission and the EU will work hard to deal with these concerns on the ground, because naturally the people of Northern Ireland, having heard a succession of EU leaders talk during the process of our departure from the European Union about the vital importance of safeguarding the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, people in Northern Ireland will expect that the EU will continue in that same spirit, and that the events that you allude to are recognised as a mistake which requires action to repair trust.
Yes, and on the 2nd of February, you wrote a letter to Vice President Šefčovič, which by your own scrupulously polite standards was extremely forthright. You said that rapid action was required. You said, we are both well aware that there are a number of pressing problems with the operation of the protocol that need to be addressed, and we must do so this week, that is last week. Have those problems been resolved within the week that you gave Vice President Šefčovič?
Progress is being made, but we are very far from resolving all those problems. We had a good and productive conversation with Vice President Šefčovič and with the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland. Both the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister talked privately and candidly about the challenges that people in Northern Ireland face on the ground. I've been talking to not just the parties in Northern Ireland, but also representatives of the Irish government at ministerial level. And even as we speak, Cabinet Office teams have been in discussion with the Commission as a prelude to Vice President Šefčovič coming to the UK this Thursday for more conversations. I would like to make sure that we can accelerate that progress. It's not been as fast as I would like, but I also recognise that the Commission has its own processes. I respect the integrity of those, and I respect the desire of Vice President Šefčovič to make progress.
Article 16, of course, is an article that operates for the benefit of both parties.
Yes.
And the government has made it clear that if absolutely necessary, it will trigger the Article 16 procedure, presumably observing the schedule set out in Annex 7, unlike the European Union. Does that remain the case? And if so, what would you propose to do pursuant to the terms of Article 16?
Well, we hope that we will be able to resolve all of the issues on the ground without recourse to Article 16. But as the Prime Minister has stated, should it be required, then it exists precisely for the purposes that you mentioned.
And what action would you take? Because, of course, Article 16 is not specific as to the remedies available to the aggrieved party.
To return to the letter that I wrote to Vice President Šefčovič and to the other comments that I made in the House of Commons, what I want to do is to find practical solutions to some of the challenges that we face. And those challenges, as I have listed, relate to the ability of people in Northern Ireland to have access to goods, to conduct their business and to live their lives in a way with as little impact as possible. And it seems to me that whether or not it's the provision of plants and seeds to household gardeners, or whether it's the effective supply of goods on supermarket and shop shelves in Northern Ireland, we need to make sure that we resolve those problems.
And of course, the implementing regulation remains in place. Looking at the list of exemptions to that regulation, it's perfectly apparent that it was aimed specifically at the United Kingdom in what might be described charitably as a vindictive action. What steps is the government taking to ensure that that regulation actually disappears and is no longer in place?
Well, you're absolutely right that the implementing regulation remains in place. We do not believe that that is wise or in the EU's interests. And you're absolutely right, of course, that even though the EU said that they would not be invoking Article 16 on this occasion, that they haven't given a solemn and binding undertaking never to do so. The Pandora's box has been opened, and that is concerning. A former UK Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin said, if you open that Pandora's box, who knows what Trojan horses will come out. And one of the consequences of opening that Pandora's box has been the unfortunate effects that you listed and that we referred to on the ground in Northern Ireland. With respect to the implementing regulation, the Prime Minister discussed with the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, the impact of the implementing regulation. He received firm and clear assurances that there would be no disruption of supply of vaccines to the United Kingdom, and that contracts properly, freely and legally entered into would be respected. I'm grateful for those assurances, but as you say, still having that implementing regulation in place is not something that I think anyone can contemplate with serene equanimity.
Well, indeed, and far better than having the regulation in place would be an undertaking from the European Union immediately to revoke it.
Well, again, it would be better had that implementing regulation not been produced. It would be better if it left. But of course, both the UK and the EU are sovereign equals. The EU will make its own decisions. Others will draw their own conclusions.
But does not the continued existence of that regulation only go to increased bad blood between the UK and the European Union? And is it not the case also that our future relations will be coloured by the experiences of the last weekend of January? And you quoted Ernest Bevin. Is there not also another well-known saying, which is, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me?
Absolutely take your point. What I would say is, firstly, that action was particularly the invocation of Article 16, was acknowledged by the Commission to be a mistake. I personally believe that the bringing forward of the implementing regulation was an error. Personally, I want to ensure that we have as good a relationship with our friends and neighbours in Europe as possible. That means understanding when errors are made and a desire to work constructively together. But I think you are right that it is important that the nature of this error is well understood and the feelings of people in the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland are well understood, and that part of my role is calmly but firmly to spell out what the consequences of these actions are, and to allow our friends in Europe to reflect on that. Taking a couple of steps back, I hope you can see how much I deprecate the implementing regulation having been produced, but I also do believe that there are good reasons for us to want a good, strong trading and friendship relationship with our friends in Europe. So I hope that appropriate lessons can be learned.
Thank you.
If I may just add to that, some people may say, with friends like this, who needs enemies? The reality is it was a vindictive act, as Mr. Jensen just said. And I did ask you last week if you would raise the question of revoking the regulation with Mr. the day after the session in the House of Commons. Did you ask him, and what was his response?
No, I specifically did not ask Mr. Šefčovič in our meeting for that. Our meeting was primarily to look at and to allow him to understand what the practical issues on the ground in Northern Ireland were. So we had, I think, around 45 minutes of conversation, but I will have the opportunity to go into greater detail with Vice President Šefčovič during the course of our meeting later this week. It's also a case, of course, that the Prime Minister made very clear, again in a private conversation with President von der Leyen, how one felt, how we felt about that decision. But the broader thing again is maybe I'm sure that some people in the Commission wouldn't agree with this, but maybe I'm a bit, what's the word? Over optimistic. I think it is possible for lessons to be learned and for relationships to be put on a better footing for the future. I very, very much want us to see us having a good and cordial and constructive relationship with the European Union and its member states. So, as I say, appropriate lessons can be learned. But I think it's also important that we look to see how the damage that was done can be repaired. So it's important that actions are taken rapidly, but I think it's also important that for someone in my position and of my persuasion, that we show understanding as well as firmness.
I would just add one further point, and that is to ask you, given the fact that many people, quite rightly, have great confidence in the Prime Minister in terms of seeking assurances. The reality is that when it comes to a regulation in the hands of the European Commission, which they've made themselves quite deliberately, some may think that you're being rather generous to them, and that in fact it would be a good idea for you to ask them to revoke the regulation when you see the said Maros Šefčovič the end of this week or in the beginning of next week. Would you like to do that? Would you be prepared to do it?
I'll certainly ask the Prime Minister what the right approach is, certainly given the strong views expressed by members of this committee. And I will also, and I don't mean this in anything other than a sincere way, I'll also be glad to communicate to the Commission that members of this committee think that I'm a bit of a softie when it comes to dealing with the EU. That's
very kind of you. Richard Drax, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, Chancellor, and to your colleagues. Before I move on to Northern Ireland Protocol and lawmaking, can I just ask you, Chancellor, do you think the protocol is working? Do you think it's fit for purpose for the next 5, 10, 20 years?
It's not working at the moment. It can be made to work. The ultimate decision on whether or not it survives is with the people of Northern Ireland.
And can you explain further for our listeners what that exactly means?
Yes, I think that as my letter to Maros Šefčovič pointed out, and as to be fair, lots of media commentary has pointed out, there are disruptions and difficulties faced by Northern Ireland citizens in their daily lives that need to be resolved. They can be resolved within the context of the protocol. We don't need to ditch it in order to resolve those issues. But as the Prime Minister has spelt out, if we can't make progress in resolving those issues, then the UK government has to reserve its rights.
And on that point, I mean, I'm sure you'd appreciate there's a lot of anger in Northern Ireland about the protocol, not least over the Irish Sea and the border there, and the various imports and exports and all the other problems they're having, quite apart from what Mr. Jones was talking about. Are they really seriously resolvable? Because I can't see personally the EU being as it is, and as we have many years of not particularly helpful experience with this organization, they're ever going to change their position on this.
I think these issues are resolvable. It is the case that the flexibility exists in order to resolve them. The very fact of having a joint committee is an acknowledgement on the EU's part, and indeed on ours, that we need to make sure that the operation of the protocol is kept under review and that we refine it in the interests of the people of Northern Ireland. So it is possible, absolutely, to resolve these issues. It remains to be seen, of course, if we can do so. I hope we can.
And do you think we'll keep the United Kingdom together, or is this a major threat, as some would say, to the future of the United Kingdom? Because if you recall, Chancellor, you and I and many others worked to take the UK out of the EU as one single country. In that regard, we've failed, have we not?
No, I don't believe so. I think it is the case that the United Kingdom, its constitutional, territorial, political integrity is unaffected. I think it is the case that that Northern Ireland remains firmly, and the protocol underlines this, within the customs territory of the UK. There are UK laws and UK institutions which are responsible for the welfare of and the protection of the citizens of Northern Ireland. An approach was taken in the run-up to the conclusion of the withdrawal agreement that the UK would seek, using its own institutions and processes, to play its part in helping to safeguard the EU's single market, because Northern Ireland was the one part of the UK with a land border. So our approach has always been to be generous and thoughtful in making sure that we can be good neighbours consistent with our own territorial integrity. But as you quite rightly point out, people in Northern Ireland want to see the UK government resolving these issues. They want, first of all, to see them resolved in partnership with the EU, but they want to see them resolved.
Moving on now to, as I said, to the law. At what stage in its lawmaking progress would you expect the EU to inform the UK of any forthcoming legislation that it might consider to be within the scope of the protocol?
Well, I would expect that anything to do with the protocol should be resolved through the Joint Committee, and that goes back to David Jones's excellent point about the operation of the protocol. If there are issues, they should be resolved through the Joint Committee. The Joint Committee exists because inevitably there will be issues which require to be resolved, and there is a means for doing so. And the principle is that the Joint Committee looks at these issues, that time is taken to seek to resolve them, and it's only if they can't be resolved in the Joint Committee or through conversation that other steps can be contemplated by either side.
So in regard to how will the government monitor, assess and seek to influence such legislation, your answer would be through the Joint Committee?
Yes.
Now, the Joint Committees already, of which you're a part, went away and came back with a law none of us have heard of, nor do we take part in. What do you reckon, or how do you see the future, the transparency of this committee?
Well, I think every aspect of what the Joint Committee agrees, as I mentioned earlier, the agenda is shared with Parliament, and of course Parliament can choose. Parliament retains the sovereign right, and indeed Sibyl's amendment to the legislation taking us out of the EU reaffirmed that sovereign right to legislate in our own interests when we consider that to be appropriate. You know, that ultimate power is there. The debate surrounding the United Kingdom Internal Market Bill reinforce that. You know, wherever possible, we want to achieve things through agreement, but the UK Parliament is sovereign. That was a consequence of our withdrawal from the EU, and it remains so.
What role does the UK mission to the European Union have in advancing the UK's interests in respect of draft law applicable under the Northern Ireland Protocol?
Well, the UK mission is led by an excellent diplomat, Lindsay Crossdale-Appleby, who was one of David Frost's deputies in negotiating the trade and cooperation agreement. And the mission there and the skilled team there do their very best in order to ensure that UK interests are well understood by the Commission and by other EU institutions. I should say that I might ask my colleague Jess Glover just to say a little bit more about how the UK mission operates in order to safeguard our interests.
Thank you very much, CDL. So, as you say, Lindsay, who has very long experience working on EU matters and most recently was involved in supporting David Frost on the negotiations, is now head of our mission there. He is firmly established in Brussels and he is working tirelessly day in, day out to make sure that we have in place the relationships that we will need as non-EU members to understand what is happening in the EU, to follow what is happening in the EU, and to understand what may or may not relate to the UK's interests as far as the EU's plans are developed. Of course, we also have a very, very well-established network of FCDO posts across the EU 27 member states, whose job it also is to understand what those member states are up to, if you like, in terms of developments within the EU, and that is another way to sort of track and follow what is going on there.
Thank you. And finally, for me, what will the respective roles of the UK government and the Northern Ireland Executive be, particularly where a draft EU legislative act applicable under the protocol concerns matters of both reserved and devolved competence?
Well, it is the case, as the committee knows, that it's up to the Northern Ireland Executive when new legislation comes forward to take its own view, but we work with the Northern Ireland Executive to make sure that, as you quite rightly point out, whether matters are devolved or reserved, that we can have an accepted common position. But again, I might ask Brendan Threlfall just to say a little bit more about the role of the NIE in this matter. Brendan.
Thanks, CDL. Yes, I think in areas where there's a mixture of reserved and devolved competence, that generally can be handled in different ways. Sometimes we would take the relevant statutory instrument through Westminster. In other occasions, the Assembly is able to legislate even where there are reserved issues, and the Northern Ireland Act allows the Assembly to legislate with the Secretary of State's consent. So there are different mechanisms for doing that, and certainly in relation to any relevant legislation we were aware of, we would engage very closely with the executive. The executive attends specialised committee meetings at official level and also attends joint committee meetings at ministerial level as well on the protocols. So it's very closely plugged into the structures.
Thank you very much. Chairman.
Yes, Anne-Marie Morris again, please, on the next question.
Thank you, Chairman. Chancellor, you've already explained to us that it is the Prime Minister who will ultimately decide who is going to be our representative on the Partnership Council. Now, you'll appreciate that until that appointment is made, the Council can't meet. And that seems to me to be a very unhappy state of affairs. So what's stopping the Prime Minister making that appointment? Is it going to be you?
Nothing is stopping the Prime Minister making that appointment. It's his decision. Whatever decision the Prime Minister makes will always be the right one.
So, Chancellor, you have not been approached with regard to your willingness to take this role?
I will always do whatever the Prime Minister asks me to, but it is the case that it's his decision. The chair of the, or the co-chair has to be a minister, but it can be any minister, and there are many other very, very skilled ministers who could do the job significantly better than I could.
So, Chancellor, you say that there is nothing stopping the Prime Minister making his decision and making this announcement, but you've not really explained why, nor when we can have an answer. It seems to me, if there's nothing stopping him, we should have the answer tomorrow, surely.
Well, it is above my pay grade. The Prime Minister makes decisions. I do what he tells me to. It's not the other way around.
I think from that, Chancellor, this is still a question which remains unanswered, which is a shame.
Indeed. But it's the Prime Minister's prerogative, and quite right too.
And I've no doubt the Prime Minister will be extremely robust. Regarding the next question, Alan Dorrans, please.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement will cease to apply on 20th of February if the EU has not completed its ratification procedures by that date. Do you expect the EU to request an extension, and would the government support such an extension, and for how long?
No, I don't believe the EU will request an extension.
And if they do?
Well, I would be very surprised if they did. I think it wouldn't just be my eyebrows that would be raised. As I think reflects the sentiment of this committee, the UK has been assiduous in living up to its obligations under the withdrawal agreement and under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. I'm sure the EU will as well.
But would an extension be acceptable to you?
Well, I think I quoted Tony Bevan earlier about Trojan horses and Pandora's boxes. Let me quote another great parliamentarian, Willie Whitelaw. The great thing about bridges is that one shouldn't cross them until one has to.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think one might add that it was the Furies that came out of the Pandora's box, if I recall correctly. So who knows what will come next. Craig McKinley.
Thank you, Chairman. Chancellor, if we can just have a little bit of a discussion on the UK trader scheme.
Yes.
The scheme by which all thought would be very easy to transport goods from the mainland over to Northern Ireland. I think the PM many times said, oh, scrap the paperwork, won't need any, it'll all be very, very simple. Now, there are really three groups. There are those that got themselves into gear before the end of the transition period, who can sort of self-certify that there is no risk of leakage into the EU single market. Then there are those who will be applying after the end of the transition period, and they have a sort of 4-month grace period of fairly easy procedures. And then there are those at the end of Feb who have not yet applied, and they won't be able to get their certification for a further month. Now, what are the sort of numbers involved? I would have thought you'll have a different stratification of the big boys who keep themselves abreast of all these things, and those smaller and occasional traders who may not quite have got themselves into gear yet. Have you got any feel for those numbers just yet?
I do, but a person who's got a much greater command of them is my colleague Emma Churchill, who's been involved in setting up the Trader Support Service. I think it's the case that it's more than 11,000 businesses who are registered with it. But I'll hand over to Emma and Jess in a second. One thing I should say, though, is that there has been some speculation in the media over the weekend. I understand it was in the Observer newspaper about trade flows more broadly with the European Union. And there was a suggestion that somehow exports had fallen by 68%. I'm afraid that figure was erroneous, and it was based on a partial survey. Truer figures were published on the Cabinet Office website, and indeed the Port of Dover today has confirmed that the level of traffic is north of 90% of what one would expect at this time of year, even though, of course, traders have to take COVID tests. I think it's important to put that in context, because you are right. There are issues which traders face, both in exporting to the EU and also in moving goods within the United Kingdom. But that contextualization is important. But I'll hand over to Emma and Jess to say a little bit more about the specific question, because I think that your division into three is absolutely right. Emma.
Thank you. I'll just say something possibly in addition to what you just said about GB-EU flows, and then I'll let Jess come back with some of the specifics on Northern Ireland businesses and GB businesses trading into Northern Ireland. So that's right, CDL, in spite of some of the reports that have been in the media, in fact, trade flows have held up exceptionally well since the end of the transition period. They were low at the beginning of January, but they have been increasing very significantly. For February to date, indeed, total outbound across all our ports, 98% of the equivalent last year, and for inbound, 99% of the equivalent last year. So those trade flows in general, although I think the categories that you set out in terms of businesses who are fully prepared for the end of the transition period and businesses who are just now preparing and therefore starting to trade apply actually equally across GB-EU trade as well as specifically trade into Northern Ireland. It is important to say that those trade flows are absolutely at their normal levels as we start February. So reports to the contrary are incorrect, but I will let Jess give you some specific figures in relation to Northern Ireland business.
Thank you, Emma. I mean, I think that the categories that the member of the committee outlines in terms of those who were ready, those who are now getting ready, those who've still got a bit of a job to do to be ready, I mean, it's sort of absolutely right. And the government is doing everything it can to support businesses in getting up the learning curve as quickly as possible. For example, CDL has a weekly meeting called the Brexit Business Task Force, which is designed to engage businesses on these very questions of how to get ready for the new arrangements with the EU. And there are multiple helplines. There's a gov.uk service where you can sign up and register yourself and then get alerts for anything that affects you. There's all sorts of things in place. Specifically regarding GB to NI trade movements, we now have over 25,000 businesses registered for the Trader Support Scheme. When we were preparing this scheme in the autumn, our ambition was to have 12,000 registered. So we're very pleased with that uptake, but we would also really urge any business who trades in Northern Ireland who's listening to this also to register for the Trader Support Scheme, which is there to facilitate and make those processes easier. The other thing I wanted to highlight is that GB to NI trade flows are back to normal and indeed are slightly higher now than they were in the equivalent week last year. So we're not seeing disruptions in trade flows on that route, which is, again, a testimony to the really good work that many businesses I know have done to get themselves ready for those arrangements. But that's not to say that everybody is up at the top of the learning curve right now.
Okay, can I just examine another aspect of all this? It'll be very much dependent on how complicated is the widget that you're trying to produce, or what the external tariff or the EU external tariff rate is likely to be. But I'm hearing of some reports of some companies just thinking, well, I won't bother with this, the UK trader scheme, because it's all too complicated. I've got to maintain rules of origin, the makeup of my widget I'm making for 5 years, which is a fairly long period to maintain these type of records. Some are just saying, well, I'm not worried. I will suffer the tariff. I will treat myself as if I'm a completely non-EU, non-part of the withdrawal agreement trader, and will just suffer the tariff. So I don't have to keep the 5 years of records, worry about my rules of origin. What do you think the levels of those are? I mean, I find it very worrying that a GB to NI trader would be, as part of the United Kingdom, would be thinking along those terms. But I'm obviously worried those who just exporting to what we call the traditional continent of Europe are going along that line of thinking as well. Any thoughts on that? As I say, it'll be different compared to, depending on what the tariff level is and the complexity of the makeup of the good you're making.
You're absolutely right, Craig, that rules of origin questions are one of those that has cropped up most frequently since the TCA. And you are right that there are one or two companies, I think those that are trading with the EU, that have thought that rather than provide particulars on to satisfy the rules of origin requirements, we'll just take it on the nose. But I think the situation is very different in the transfer of goods to Northern Ireland. And I'll hand over to Jess.
That's exactly the distinction that I would have made, CDL. So between the EU and the UK, in order to qualify for those zero tariffs, you do indeed need to comply with the rules of origin. Now, that is a new bit of process that companies are having to get used to, but it is there for a reason, which is to protect the EU and UK companies from, for example, imports from other countries that are not part of that agreement coming through and benefiting from those zero tariffs when they shouldn't and oughtn't to. So cheap products from another country further away benefiting from those zero tariffs when they're not actually eligible. So it's to stop other goods from other countries pretending to come from the UK or the EU, if you like. So that paperwork is indeed there. And some companies, in particular where the tariffs are very small, so if a tariff is only a very marginal part of your overall cost base, may well take the decision that it's better to pay the tariff than it is to fill in the paperwork. Those are individual commercial decisions that I wouldn't want to comment on. As far as Northern Ireland is concerned, that is a very different picture. There are no tariffs applicable on goods moving from GB to NI, and there are no tariffs applicable on goods moving from NI into the EU. So that is a very different picture where rules of origin, it doesn't come into the equation in the same way.
Okay, just finally from me, there are lots of stories. I think they are true from what I've read about supermarkets being concerned about these derogations, these short-term derogations, particularly on meat products. Let's talk about pork pies and Scotch eggs. Very much part of UK fare. They're concerned about the end of this transitional period. What is going to happen? I know you wrote last week as part of your letter to Šefčovič that these things should be extended for a further couple of years. I'm not entirely sure that putting off inevitables is always a great solution. But where is all this going to settle? Because the alternative will be that the Sainsbury's and Morrisons in Northern Ireland will have to be perhaps looking to source their products from the Republic because it's just all that much easier. It's always been a stuff of madness to me. I don't believe there are Sainsbury's stores in the Republic. So when you've got something badged Sainsbury's in Northern Ireland that's come from the mainland, the prospect of leakage seems very low. And I would have thought that is what trading standards officers are there for in no matter what part of the EU, whether it be the Republic or France.
Some very good points there. The first thing I should say, only half in jest, is that I have to be careful talking about Scotch eggs because I often get into trouble when dilating on that particular subject. But the serious point that you raise is twofold. One, there are restrictions, P&R restrictions on chilled meat entering the EU single market. We have a derogation or a grace period for a while in Northern Ireland, but we do need to get to a more stable solution. You're absolutely right. Then there is a separate but related issue about supermarkets in particular and other traders and their capacity to make sure that they're ready to meet EHC requirements. It is the case that supermarkets, with the help of the Trader Support Service and outside expertise like that provided by Mr. Shanker-Singham, are moving quickly to integrate that into their systems so that there's no problem getting the goods that folk enjoy in Northern Ireland from the UK. Again, some supermarkets have been faster than others in making that adjustment. But one of the things that we've said, you're quite right, in the letter that we sent to the Commission is if we are all collectively serious about the protocol having the least impact on the people of Northern Ireland, then we need time to adjust to make sure that we have a stable and sustainable approach on both those issues.
Yeah, am I to take it, I was raised by one of my colleagues earlier on, that you've had absolutely zero response from Mr. Šefčovič from your letter of last week? I think it was Mr. Jones said, you asked for something within the next week, and we're now 2 weeks on, and letter unanswered, it would seem to be.
Well, we're 2 weeks on now, well, almost 2 weeks on from the EU's decision to publish its implementing regulation. We're just about a week on from my letter, and I'm not trying to quibble. I agree with you, the need for urgency. But we have had good conversations so far with the Commission. But of course, what we need to do is to see joint action, and that's what I'm hoping we'll be able to secure on Thursday.
Okay, well, I will be coming back to something later on, but isn't it rather odd that advice for some traders by, it seems to me, HMRC is, well, that trade has just ceased. It shall not continue because there is no means of solving it. But I'm sure some colleagues will be extrapolating on that as I pass on, I believe, to Mr. Fish.
Yes, Marcus, could you be kind enough to take the ones that we decided in relation to 11, 12 and 16 all in one go? Because I think otherwise we might run a little bit tight on time. So could you do 11, 12 and 16 in one, please?
Yeah. So thank you. Chancellor, in its guidance on the 6-month grace period for chilled meat products, the government says it will continue to explore permanent reciprocal arrangements to enable this trade to continue. How confident are you that such arrangements will be in place by 1st of July 2021 if the EU doesn't agree to extend its grace period?
Well, I wouldn't want to make predictions at this stage, but you're absolutely right. It is our aim to make sure that we can have, as I mentioned in response to Craig, a stable and sustainable solution.
So what sort of reciprocity is being mooted?
Again, I wouldn't want to say more at this stage because we're sharing some ideas with the Commission. And again, if we can get purchase on those, then I'll come back to this committee or to the House to explain our approach. But at the moment, it's in the nature of the negotiation, or the discussion, I should say, that I want to give the Commission time to digest, no pun intended, the approach that we propose to take. Again, the approach overall, similar to a position that very far from identical to the position that Lord Frost took during the negotiations on the TCA, is that we always seek to keep Parliament updated, but we also respect the fact that when you have discussions on trade or regulatory issues between two partners, that those conversations might sometimes proceed best, through confidential dialogue, and then at an appropriate moment when a decision needs to be taken and approved by the House of Commons or others, we can let people know what that is. But the overall direction of travel is, as I've outlined, we want to try and get to a sustainable long-term arrangement.
Okay, so when it comes to parcels, will customs declarations be required for those that are sent from GB to Northern Ireland from April of this year, and will the current temporary arrangements be extended to 1st of January 2023, as you've asked for in the letter?
Well, I hope that we can extend them. I might again bring in Brendan Threlfall. Brendan, again, and his team have been talking to the Commission about some of these questions. Again, I won't ask Brendan to go into detail about the nature of the conversations for the reasons that I've just outlined, but he can say a little bit more about the background and context, I hope.
Thank you, CDL. Yes, as you say, on the parcels, our proposal is that you wouldn't need a declaration for those business to consumer parcels, and that those arrangements should be extended till 2023 whilst we work on a light touch longer term approach, and that we also want to address some of the barriers. Although there's that customs declaration waiver in place already till April, we've seen on the regulatory side that causing some issues for parcel deliveries to consumers. So CDL gave the example of the delivery of seeds and bulbs. So we also want to tackle that issue in the medium term, in the immediate term, as well as the wider proposal to extend the grace period till 2023.
Yeah, in terms of these different types of easements that you're seeking, there are others as well. I understand that you're seeking in terms of rules of origin and that kind of thing. Are you going to what is your plan for engaging with business to make sure that they are able to have enough time to get ready for any eventuality either way with these things? And how has your engagement been with them up until this point?
As I think we mentioned earlier, every week something called the Brexit Business Task Force meets, and there are every week there are business representative organisations on it, and they can't cover every business, but we try to have as comprehensive a view as possible. So as well as the CBI, we also make sure that the IOD, the Federation of Small Business, British Chambers of Commerce, and others are involved. Every week we look at a different aspect of UK business. So 1 week we'll have representatives from the food and drink sector, say, and they will include both organisations like the Food and Drink Federation, but also at our insistence, individual companies at the front line. So the views of business representative organisations are important, but as you'll appreciate, Marcus, it's even more important to hear from individual companies about what's going well and what's going less well. And we also look at it on a geographical basis as well. So we've had businesses from Northern Ireland in one meeting, Scotland in another, Wales last week. We're looking at creative industries this week. And it's also the case that there's a Northern Ireland Business Council, which the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland talks to. But one of the points that I think was well made and well understood by this committee is that while lots of Northern Ireland businesses were ready for the protocol, not every business in Great Britain was as ready as it might have been. No one to blame but me for that, but that's something that we're acting on now.
Right. And in those discussions, have you had any feedback from business on the implications for their trade with Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland's trade with GB?
Yes.
In terms of state aid and the potential for reach back of the Northern Ireland Protocol provisions into businesses operating in the UK? Because it seems to me that this is another area where perhaps the EU may now be taking a different approach in their current declarations of what their agreements with you in the Joint Committee in the past mean.
Well, so far, I haven't had any, in those meetings, I haven't had any direct representation from businesses about the potential for reach back. As you say, we agreed in the Joint Committee, and it's a binding process on both sides, an approach whereby the EU would have to demonstrate, I can't remember the exact words, but a real and material impact of any action that we took to provide state aid to companies operating in Great Britain. It was quite a high bar. I haven't seen any evidence of the EU or the Commission resigning from that, but I'd be very interested in that. But even though this issue hasn't been raised in any of the task force meetings that we've had, I do know that thoughtful contributors to this debate, like Barnabas Reynolds and others, have published material on it, which we read with interest in government and which we're reflecting on even as we speak.
Good. Thank you very much. Alan Dorrans, would you be kind enough to ask about settled status?
Certainly, Chair. Chancellor, the deadline for EEA citizens to apply for settled status in the UK will expire on the 30th of June. The government has said it will take a flexible and pragmatic approach to applications made after that date. When will you issue further guidance for caseworkers to determine whether there are reasonable grounds for a late application? And will reasonable grounds take some account of the disruption and anxiety caused by the COVID pandemic? And what assessment have you made of the impact that a sudden withdrawal of legal status at the end of June would have on the provision of critical health and social care services in the UK?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Alan. Thank you. The first thing that I would say is your point about guidance for caseworkers and others is very well made. I will talk to my colleagues in the Home Office who have operational responsibility for the scheme in order to make sure that that occurs. The second thing is that obviously we wouldn't want to make any decisions that would impair our capacity to deal with the pandemic. And the third thing is, you are absolutely right, of course, some people's personal circumstances affected by the pandemic may mean that it might have been more difficult to meet that deadline than would otherwise have been the case. But the overall point that I would make is that during the immediate aftermath of the vote to leave the European Union, it was widespread. There was widespread agreement that there were around 3 million EU citizens in the UK. Actually, we've had around 4 million applications for settled status. which is fantastic. We were told by some, I remember it at the time in the immediate aftermath, that the vote to leave the European Union would somehow be taken by EU citizens here as a signal to depart, that somehow we'd become a less than warm home. I'm absolutely overjoyed and delighted that there are 4 million EU citizens who've chosen to make their home in the UK and to keep their home in the UK. I think it gives a lie to some of the nonsense that was promulgated at the time of the Brexit vote, that somehow the UK was less welcoming, or that EU citizens would leave, and that would be harm to our universities, to our healthcare sector and elsewhere. People have chosen to stay in unprecedented numbers, and indeed, I think the inflow of people from the EU during that period was a welcome vote of confidence in this country, its openness and its institutions. And I think, all of us, whatever view we took on the merits of leaving the European Union, should be pleased that across the United Kingdom, there are 4 million EU citizens living and working as our friends and neighbours in so many ways. It's a great advertisement for this country. And I think, when it comes to future migration, I know that we in the UK will continue to take a generous approach, as we've shown in fulfilling or seeking to fulfil our obligations to British nationals in Hong Kong as they face oppression from the Beijing government.
I mean, if I may just add, CDL, I think that is absolutely right. We've granted 4.3, there have been 4.3 successful applications for settled status. There are many, many people in the Home Office working on that. I do think the time available now, between now and the 30th of June, for people to make their applications is really good. It's really important that people do, any remaining people do get on and do that.
Yes. In fact, I can update it. According to the latest published statistics, there have been 4.9 million applications and 4.3 million grants of status. So, there are more EU citizens in the UK than there are in some EU member states, which is great.
Good, thank you very much. Is that all, Alan?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. On the question of financial services, some people may know that Barney Reynolds, who you just referred to, has issued a pamphlet through Politeer, as it happens, and I think the Attorney General has also contributed to the launch of that today. Craig McKinley, would you be kind enough to ask a question relating to the issue of financial services, on which that pamphlet happens to be concentrating as well?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the TCA itself had very little in the way of equivalence or acceptance of or anything else regarding financial services, which is, of course, a very important tax earner to the UK. It's internationally recognised as one of the best places to do that type of business. There is an expectation of a memorandum of understanding so that equivalence decisions can be progressed. That's meant to be by the end of March, which is rapidly approaching. How close are you to negotiating that, or has there been much progress on that at all, Chancellor?
Yes, is the short answer. Again, some of the issues here are governed by the EU's own autonomous processes. I think it's, this is a huge issue. I think the first thing that's fair to say is that when it comes to the health of London as and indeed the UK overall as a financial services centre, some of the things that originally some argued that we needed to maintain, passporting and so on, are nice to haves, but not integral, not absolutely integral to the success of financial services. What's truly integral to the success of financial services are the quality of the investment over many years in high quality talent, in the rule of law, in associated business services, and those are advantages that aren't eroded. It's also the case that outside the European Union, as the Chancellor has said, Chancellor of the Exchequer has said, there are a number of things that we can do in order to regulate better and to make listing easier. But one thing I should also say is that I've just had a note. I'm 5 minutes late. I fear for a an interministerial group meeting. What I would suggest, if it's okay with the committee, is that I will return at the committee's convenience to address some of these specific questions, not least on financial services. I think in discussing financial services, it would probably be helpful to me, and certainly to the committee, I suspect, if I was joined by the Economic Secretary to the Treasury by John Glenn MP, because there are aspects both of the way in which the EU will decide its autonomous processes and also the way in which the HMT will improve the position of financial services that I think the committee will want to look at in depth, and which a greater degree of time than we now have would probably facilitate.
Quite understand, Chancellor, in the circumstances. I think the short answer is, do please go to your other meeting, assuming that that's what you have to do. But also, thank you for making the suggestion that you might come back.
Oh, yes.
Hoping fairly short term, so that we'd be able to complete these questions. And if it's possible for us to deal with them in writing,
Yes.
bearing in mind that we only got the answers to the written questions today, which we asked for on the 10th of December, could you accelerate the replies, unlike the previous occasion?
Yes.
Please.
I will absolutely accelerate the replies. And the other thing is, again, I'm sure my team will discuss, Sybil, with your clerks and others, which other topics and themes you'd like the committee to return to, and which other ministers or officials it would be helpful to have. So, as I say, I can say a wee bit about financial services, but not a huge amount. And then again, if we want to quite rightly look at, for example, SPS checks and the impact that they're having, then I know that the committee would benefit not just from having me, but from having a DEFRA minister as well. And we'll do our very best to make sure that all the departments which are necessarily accountable to you are represented in future hearings.
I'm extremely glad to hear that last comment as well. And if I may say, thank you very much for coming this afternoon, and we will be in touch with you shortly.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'd like to thank all members of the committee for their hard work. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we now together without the CDL? Jessica?
I think people are still signing out, Sir Bill.
Chairman, we're still in a public format meeting.
Thank you.